Hello and welcome to another episode of Equipping the Corps. Today, my guest is Chief Warrant Officer 4 David Tomlinson. He is a gunner with Portfolio Manager Ground Combat Element Systems. As an infantry weapons officer or gunner, he is the resident infantry subject matter expert for Marine Corps Systems Command. He provides technical direction and support to program managers, project officers, and their teams in developing weapons, optics, and other gear. The Marine Corps is modernizing and implementing the Commandant's vision of Force Design 2030. At the heart of that modernization is the individual Marine, and making that Marine more lethal and more survivable. Marine Corps Systems Command has spent the last couple of years focused on doing just that, and the gunner has played a critical role. Gunner, thanks for being here with us. So before we get started, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, how long you've been in the Corps?
Sure. I came in the delayed entry program in 1996. My first 14 enlisted years, I was a team leader, squad leader, scout sniper, platoon sergeant, platoon commander. Had a few MOSs within the infantry battalion with machine guns and infantry unit leaders course and stuff. Got commissioned in 2011 and have been a gunner since then. So coming up on 12 years now. I was in 2-8 as the battalion gunner. I was actually the weapons company commander on our first Afghan deployment, and then went to 225. I was the security force regiment gunner, and then now here at Systems Command.
Well, thanks for your service, and more importantly, thanks for being part of the team here. You're the first gunner here at Systems Command. Why is it important to have a gunner here?
So I have peers in every infantry battalion, regiment, division, all the entry-level training sites and the supporting establishments. So I'm able to answer RFIs for them, but more importantly, canvass them for information that we can utilize here within the command. The example I always use is the new high-cut helmet that we're fielding. So I started getting text messages, emails, as we were fielding the new squad bino MVGs, that they weren't fitting properly and the balance was off in the helmet. When you look at the old helmet, it was an older suspension retention system. So just being able to go to PM ICE and talk to the PM there and show him the concerns that the Marines had, and then also that it wasn't fitting the over-the-ear hearing enhancement devices. The wires were kind of haphazardly taped and dummy corded to the helmets. We looked at potentially modifying our helmet that could accommodate that. So in less than 7-8 months, PM ICE was able to turn around with a ECP helmet, which is an engineering changing proposal, which just modified the current helmet that we had, made the cut a little bit different, added some rails to it, and swapped out the suspension retention system. And now that's probably the highest demand item that the fleet is asking for. And just from a simple couple emails from some folks in my community and being able to voice that to the PM, pretty quickly they were able to turn and refield something pretty quickly to the FMF that now is probably one of the most high demand items that the fleet's asking for.
So I got to ask you, we'll talk a little bit about some of the latest equipment and whatnot, but I gotta pry a little bit and say, take you back maybe 10 years. Yeah. And you know, you're messing around with all your gear and whatnot. Did you ever envision yourself being on the acquisition end, being that individual who's kind of the linkage between the Marine messing with that gear and the engineers here actually trying to field what's
definitely
what's
not
available?
I had no idea.
Tell us a little bit about that.
So my first experience was my first time stationed in Quantico when I was a combat instructor over at TBS, the basic school. We were testing out the new utilities, the pattern. And I remember they were looking for guys that had former sniper backgrounds to basically go stand in the woods and see if we could identify the different patterns. It was all civilians and didn't know what they did or where they were from, just knew they were looking at a bunch of different patterns, shades, colors. And I thought it was pretty cool that they were asking some younger Marines for feedback on just uniforms. So fast forward 15 years from then, actually more than that, 20 years from then, and being here now and seeing the process and what all goes into just procuring something as small as, you know, a new helmet all the way to a set of complex firing systems or, new Carl Gustaf recoilless rifles, and what goes into that and why the process is in place. I have a greater appreciation for the professional acquisitions folks that we have in this command and why it's a primary MOS for uniform people and why we retain our civilian population for so long, because it takes that long to really understand the process and get good at it. So at the end of the day, you can field something faster, more effectively, and more efficiently to who I was 20 years ago, standing in the woods in some various patterns of camouflage.
Now, I know you bring a wealth of experience, obviously, to our folks here based on your experience and whatnot, but do you reach back to the community, and what kind of engagement do you have on a regular basis?
Yep. So every day I talk to the division gunners, whether it's updating them on gear and equipment that's going to get fielded to their division, whether a project officer, team lead, or PM has an RFI. So just this morning I got a question, hey, can you canvass the fleet and find out if the screws on the SBMVG are coming loose? We heard that the screws are starting to come loose. I got 10 email responses back in about 30 minutes that some confirmed that there was some loose screws. So right now we have engineers over there messing around with screws and Loctite and different things to figure out if they can figure out how to make the screws from not coming loose.
So no pun intended, but you really get down to the nuts and bolts of things here, don't you, on a regular basis? Where do you, I know your community must get together from time to time. What is the feedback that you get? What do they want to see from the interaction here with Marine Corps Systems Command?
Yeah, so one thing that I started doing last year was travel with Lieutenant Presagian when he goes to his MEF and division trips. At that same time, I kind of break off and reach out to the company and field grade officers in my community, just to kind of give them updates on what we're working here within the command. As far as my community, once a year we meet annually at the Marine Gunner Symposium, and sometimes we'll have some directing topics. I'll go through our portfolios here within the command and it's a chance for me to let all the gunners know, there's about 99 of us, what all we're working on, what's coming up, and then areas where we need their input or support for future development of systems or gear and equipment that we're looking to field. So that's really the time where we decide, based off of inputs from general officers, from division concerns, from my community or our schools, that there's gaps potentially where we need to figure out if there's a material solution or whether there's something we need to go back to and write a requirement to officially fill that gap. So we might host working groups within the symposium. It's a week long, and then we'll outbrief to either the IOAG, PP&O. Our outbriefs go to the ground board every year, and then from there, the DCs will chair them and figure out if they want to prioritize anything that comes out of our symposium. But if I'm doing my job throughout the year, everybody should have the communication with our command and myself with the FMF, that we don't have to wait till that annual symposium. That's just really a good chance to get everybody together and put some pen to paper and do some work.
So I've been involved in some programs in the past, and we've got phenomenal engineers, and they really come up with some fantastic solutions for problem sets and whatnot. But I think at the end of the day, and I know I had some experience with a particular vehicle, at the end of the day, although it made great sense for the engineer, it wasn't necessarily the marine-proof type of thing. Is that something you find yourself putting yourself in that situation, whether it's yourself, Marines from the fleet that come in? Can you share with us a little bit on once you get a piece of gear, what do you do with it to get it to that marine-proof?
So marine proofing is easier said than done, I think. Our engineers are great, and they are definitely subject matter experts within their field that they concentrate on. But sometimes they just don't know what we, at the lowest levels of the service, potentially need. So when you look at our new pistol that we're fielding, there's different MOSs or career fields that need different types of holsters. And folks here probably don't know that. Your law enforcement folks need a certain kind of holster and a level of retention that's required based on their policies and Marine quarters. You've got security folks, security force MOSs that require a different holster. Recon has to jump with their holsters, so they might not necessarily be cognizant of that. And what I can do is get various samples of different kinds of holsters, take them to the units, let them get their feedback from them, and then we can officially go out to industry with, here's the specific types of holsters we would like to go after, get their proposals back, and then down select eventually. So Marine proofing, though, so you can look at like the SBMVG would be a good one. The squad night bino MVGs that we're fielding. They're very expensive and they're slightly fragile. However, there's a healthy balance we have to come to where it's not bulletproof, but it also is durable enough to survive basic use. And there's a little bit of education that goes along with that too. And I find myself harping on this wherever I go, that you've got to take care of your gear and equipment. Your $4,000 set of MVGs from just a few years ago compared to $14,000 now, you've got to treat it better. If it was bulletproof, it'd be heavier, and you don't want to put any more weight on your head than you need to.
Right.
So it's a little bit fragile, but I think we're doing better as a service, educating the younger Marines that your gear is not as cheap as it used to be 10 years ago.
So I'm glad you mentioned education, because we field a lot of capability, and we're going to get into that in just a second here. But can you talk a little bit about, so it's not just we develop a piece of gear, we manufacture, we get industry to manufacture it, obviously, and we field it. There's care and attention that goes with it. There's training. How much involved do you get in some of that aspect of it?
All the new equipment training I'm involved with from the beginning, whether it's the TMs, which I'll source out to my community as well.
Technical manuals.
The technical manuals, we'll send them out and I'll get feedback on them for recommended verbiage or just better formatting potentially that's easier for the Marine to understand. We'll develop some of the initial new equipment training classes that we'll hand over to the various commands that they can in turn run the trainer for those systems that we field. And then the biggest thing that we do is provide that initial capability to the FMF when we reach that the first units that we start fielding, and getting the feedback from the units on better ways to train it, employ it, whatever the gear or equipment is. We provide new equipment training for everything before we officially hand it off to the FMF to maintain and sustain on their own. So it doesn't seem like a big deal, but I really think it's one of the most important things we do here is as we transition it from a material solution to actually fielding it and providing the proper training for it. Even at the schoolhouses, we're involved there as well within Training Command. We'll send folks there to help build those classes into their programs of instruction for future education.
I think one thing that's important for folks to understand too is we take a piece of gear now from cradle to grave. Mm-hmm. So it's not just we develop it, build it, field it, and say goodbye. We literally provide eyes and ears on it for its life cycle.
Correct.
And you continue to do that with the fleet, I'm assuming.
Yep.
So we've talked a little bit about what you do here, the importance of having you and having your community involved in the acquisition process, the fielding, evolving of some of this gear. Can you just walk us through a little bit of some of the gear you've been involved with in the last couple of years, and what are some of those things that making our Marines more lethal, more survivable?
Sure. So really the last 2 years have been the start of the largest modernization of the infantry that we've seen in the last 25 years. It started in 2016 when Secretary Mattis put together the Close Combat Lethality Task Force and organized from each of the services representatives that would focus on the close combat force. And he used to say that 90% of the casualties come from 4% of the force, not just the Marine Corps, but our sister services as well, and receive 1% of the budget. So when you look at it in those terms, that the people that are at the pointy end of the spear that are always engaged in combat and across the services receive the least amount of funding but take the most amount of casualties. I think that really focused, especially with the Marine Corps, where we needed to refocus as a service, which really affected this command to get after modernizing and fielding new equipment to the infantry and infantry-like units. So just in the last 2 years alone, squad common optic for every M27, which is a 1x8 variable power optic that is going to allow us to engage our weapon to the max effective of what it's capable of doing. Squad Bono MVGs, which we talked about before, you can now see at night as far as you can shoot. The MALS, which is the Carl Gustaf system, it's an 84 millimeter recoilless rifle with a fire control system. Modernizations to our plate carriers, they're 30% lighter now, lightweight plates, overall you get about a 50% weight savings, which is huge with the amount of weight that we already carry.
Now I'm assuming weight savings adds mobility to
Absolutely.
the individual Marines.
And that's a big learning point for the services. We used to try and cover everything with body armor,
Right.
and what we realized was the slower you are, the less survivable you are. So the lighter you can be and the faster you can be. We, over some time and some testing, realized that there has to be a healthy balance there too. And I think that's why we saw the investment in lightweight plates, a lighter PC with plate carrier, to include the helmet system now. You get a little bit more field of view out of that. So everything that we procure, we look to, one, see where we can save weight, and two, how can it make the individual Marine more lethal and more survivable.
So I know one of the been complaints over the years about particularly the plate carrier or the Kevlar vest back in my day. Yep. One size fits all, right? But I'm assuming nowadays it's not one size fits all.
Not at all.
Take this and make it work. So what goes into that, and what are some of the things we've done to do some improvements to that?
So our Marine Expeditionary Rifle Squad, MERS, who's part of the command also, got involved in human performance, and they have the ability now to size and 3D scan individuals. And what we're able to do now, we used to only field sizes to the 5th to the 95th size, male to female. Mm-hmm. And what we are able to do now is 2 to 98%. So what that did is get us from 4 sizes, small, medium, large, extra large, to 8 sizes. And they're all interchangeable.
It's quite a range now.
It is, and it fits much better, and I think there'd be a lot less of us injured, and maybe some lower VA claims had we learned this years ago. Right. But I'm glad it's out there now, and the Marines really like the gear that they're getting, and you can tell the difference when they wear it now, that they're more comfortable in it, which makes them less fatigued over time. It makes them more aware of their surroundings, and at the end of the day, it just makes them better warfighters.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. What can you tell us looking out maybe over the next year or so? What are some of your main focuses when it comes to gear?
So force design is really one of the big things we're focused on. But really we're going to end up finishing what we started 2 years ago. So unfortunately, with more complex equipment like our long-range sniper night sights or squad body MVGs, they don't get produced off the production line as fast anymore.
Right.
And they're also more expensive. So what we used to be able to do to field in 1 to 2 fiscal years takes 4 or 5 fiscal years now. And helping the FMF and the training institutions understand the gaps in capability just between sister battalions potentially is where our communication with the fleet helps them understand when they're getting stuff and why they're not all getting it at the same time. I don't know if that answers your question necessarily.
Yeah, I think it does. Okay. I think it does. I think so. My next question would probably lead me to how do you determine what unit gets what?
Yeah,
coming in. Do you play a role in that?
I do.
In those decisions?
Yeah. So not necessarily the decisions. I'll make recommendations. But
it's a good distinction.
It is.
So they shouldn't blame you.
No, not at all. We go through initially CD&I, which is our requirements command. They'll just determine which units are going to get what equipment, and then we'll go out to PP&O, which is our plans, policies, and operations section at Headquarters of Marine Corps, and they will prioritize whether it's infantry units first, whether it's specific billets and MOSs within a unit, or just the FMF and then the entry-level training sites. So they'll prioritize, and then what I'll do is I'll work with the division gunners or the MEFs, depending on the equipment, for specifically which unit they want fielded and when. And then we try and sync up our fielding timelines based off of the unit's availability and when they can provide Marines for either the new net training or to receive the gear and equipment before they start to issue it out.
That's great. So I know the Marine Corps has got a couple of experimental battalions out there that are designed to inform the future of force design 2030 going forward. They're doing a variety of things with different capabilities, different makeups, different sizes. Are you involved in any of those activities?
I am and have been for the last year and some change. So right now, 1-1, 1-2, and 1-3 are each of the division representatives for the experimental battalions. 1-1 is going to be mostly communications focused. 1-2 is going to try and source the gear and equipment as well as the new structure, the proposed structure of what the infantry battalions are going to look like. And then 1-3 is specifically just the new gear and equipment. And they're also trying to man to the MOSs as well. So 1-2 is really our hybrid between the two to see what a legacy company would look like compared to a new force design company. And McWill, which is our warfighting lab, is focused on trying to pull out the after-action reports from those units to help facilitate and inform a future decision come the end of next year to really see which direction the service is going to go with the experimental battalions and new gear and equipment and new structure that we're looking at.
And again, you mentioned the 3 battalions, and I'm assuming they're spread out across the 3 respective MEFs then.
They are, yep.
That's fantastic. Thanks for sharing that with us. So we talked early on about your perspectives on Marine Corps Systems Command and Acquisition. Can you tell us how you ended up here?
Sure. So...
did you just volunteer and say, hey, you need somebody to come fix this?
No, I think about 4 or 5 years ago at one of the symposiums, I had made a comment, which is probably why I'm here now, that we should
You weren't complaining, were you?
No. I was making an educated recommendation. So I've got up here at CD&I, at requirements, at PP&O, who basically is the Marine Corps gunner. He works for the Commandant. Training Command has a gunner. There seemed to be a gap in Systems Command with all the new gear and equipment that's getting fielded. Once a year, we hear about it at the symposium. And I had made a comment that I thought a gunner should be at Systems Command. And Colonel Manning at the time, he was a PMIW, Infantry Weapons. He was the PM for there. He kind of giggled and was like, well, it's funny you should mention that because we are trying to create a billet at Systems Command. At the time, I was probably a new CWO3, so I didn't even pay any much more attention to it.
Careful what you ask for.
Exactly. So 2 years ago, when it came up, they asked me if I would want to come here and be the first gunner here. And I jumped on the opportunity. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I just knew that I thought somebody from my community here, I didn't realize the service level impacts it would have. I thought it would be more beneficiary for my community, but I didn't realize the input that this billet would be able to have within the command.
And I'm assuming throughout your engagement here, not only being a great education process for you, but I think on the flip side, I think the command has benefited from your expertise, your experience, your connectivity to the community by bringing that experience here. We've talked a little bit about the engineers, the command, but do you deal much with industry at all and what role they play in what we do here?
I do a lot, which was another surprise, how much I interface with industry. One, just trying to keep up to speed with new advancements that they're making. Also, let's say we do have a trend or an issue with a certain set of equipment. I can reach out to the vendor and see if they've seen these same issues, and maybe they already have a solution to something we find. A good example is at the Gunner Symposium 2 years ago. It was one of the first things I worked on was we were working on the new squad common optic, and we weren't sure what reticle design to put into it. So I reached out to some of the smarter scout sniper gunners that I knew have a pretty big shooting background and asked them to canvas just their commands, but also their Marines. And then we've also got the shooting team here at Quantico that we lean on heavily for marksmanship related stuff. So as a shooting community, infantry community, gunner community, we kind of all came together. And at that symposium in 2018, we voted and designed our own custom reticle that Trigicon made for us specifically that isn't really on the civilian market, but it filled the necessity for what we needed within the infantry at that time.
And you all personally had involvement in selection of the optics and stuff?
So we voted on it. We sent the command again. I canvassed the FMF to send Marines to support the limited user revals. So they sent the Lance Corporals, squad leaders, and leadership to test out the various optics we were looking at. And at the end of the day, the Marines, favored one over the other.
Right.
And then we got into some of the finer performance specifications with that, and really focused in on what we needed, the types of dials that we would like to see on there, and then all the way down to the reticle as well.
So given the diverse portfolio that you cover, I know we talked a lot about equipment, survivability and whatnot, but there's another area that's extremely important to Marines, what they wear, their boots, things of that sort. Can you touch a little bit on any involvement you've had over the last couple of years on some of that gear?
So the helmet was one of them. The over-the-ear hearing protection, which is the HEDs. What the new HED does, hearing enhancement device, is it allows you to not only block out dangerous noise levels, it also gives you sound localization that you don't necessarily get with a pair of just $20 Lowe's earmuffs.
Right.
These you can tell specifically 360 degrees where a voice is coming from. It's digital. You can also integrate your communications into them. So you're saving Marines hearing, but you're also enhancing their awareness, which we didn't have before. And, earplugs don't do that for you, but these do that. So that was two big things I got to work with. Infantry combat equipment. Camouflage is another one. The future uniform is another area that we're looking at.
I know we've had a couple of boots over the years, winter boots. And,
winter boots was a big one, and most recently was the two variations of the jungle boot. Very lightweight, and the Marines love them. They dry really quick. We tested them out in the Jungle Warfare Training Center out in Okinawa, and that's really, the feedback from there is really what helped drive what we wanted to get after in a boot.
That's great to hear, because I love my jungle boots, but it took me a long time to find them way back when. Okay. So, but I know that's near and dear to every Marine out there. I think this has been extremely informative for myself. Really appreciate you making the time.
Absolutely.
And educating us here. But before I let you go, I got two things. We're going to get to a lightning round here real quick.
All right.
But if you had to say something to your fellow Marines out there, Marines that are thinking about Marine Corps Systems Command, how do I get involved in this process? What would you tell them?
I would tell them, and again, this is a couple things that I usually harp on when I travel. One is, if you are not happy with the gear and equipment you're being fielding, is let your chain of command know. If you find a problem with it, you can go to our website, and there's a link there where you can submit. It's kind of like a trouble ticket, but you can submit a request for information, or at least acknowledge that something you were fielded is not fitting the way that you think it should be. Or operating that way. So you can go in there and leave your recommendation, and then somebody from this command will get back to you. I know Program Manager Infantry Weapons has their own site where you can go to and submit RFIs in there as well for information. And then I think really just making sure that they stay tied into their communities, because we have representatives from all across the MAGTF in this command. So at some point, if you voice a concern up through your chain of command, it will get back to this command, and hopefully the right program manager to be able to fix something, or provide education on something that might be deficient or that's just not being utilized properly.
That's awesome. So don't just sit by the sidelines and watch and complain. Get yourself involved in the process, and
get off Facebook and get into our website.
There you go. Well, listen, we got to hit the lightning round here before we let you go. So what was your favorite duty station, and why?
Hawaii, and should be self-explanatory. Aloha Fridays.
I can only imagine.
Yeah.
We had some people here on the staff who just spent some time in Hawaii. What's a TV show, a book, a movie, or a podcast besides this podcast that you would recommend to folks?
So Ghost Fleet would be a book that I would recommend. It has a lot of areas that with force design we're focused on, which is interesting, and you kind of wonder how some of the information ends up in a book, because you sit in
before you do it, right?
Right, and it's just a new way to look at a future fight potentially. When you think about where we've been for the last 20 years, this book highlights some potential things that our country might face in a future fight. And it's good to kind of open up your mind a little bit and see some other potential issues you might have to think about. Podcasts don't really get into too much. Movies, I watch a lot of History Channel, Discovery Channel.
Hey, that's a good answer right there. Two of my favorite channels right there. If you weren't doing what you're doing now, what would you be doing?
I would be a police officer, most likely in the Philadelphia area somewhere.
Wow. City of brotherly love, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go Eagles.
But you stuck around. I'll tell you, I did the same thing. I was going in for my 4 years to join the force, and I stayed on this force instead.
Yeah.
And last but not least, if you could have any superpower, what would it be?
So definitely invisibility. We are constantly trying to figure out through camouflage or paints, SWIR mitigation, thermal mitigate, like how can we make individual Marines and equipment less visible, whether it's visual spectrums or even just emitting frequencies and stuff. How can we hide all of that? So I think if I could figure that out through a superpower, I'd pass that on to Syscom to go after and procure.
Gunner, please let me know. I mean, my staff claims I have that superpower already. So, but if you can, on Fridays, mostly on Fridays, but if you can bottle that, share with us, and I'll be the first to try it out. Listen, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us and talking about what it takes to equip our Marines. I want to wish you success in the future.
Appreciate it.
You've done some great stuff. Keep doing what you're doing. And maybe we'll have you back here at another time for another episode of Equipping the Corps.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, this concludes another episode of Equipping the Corps. I hope you've enjoyed our conversation today. If so, please take a couple minutes, leave us a review, subscribe, tell your friends about us. Till next time, Manny Pacheco signing off.